The sun bore down with merciless fury, its heat pressing against the desert floor until the earth seemed to groan in protest. In the heart of that desolate stretch of dust and rock, a young woman lay bound, her wrists tied tightly to iron stakes driven deep into the ground. Her ankles were lashed so fiercely that the coarse ropes bit into her skin, leaving raw, red welts. She was stretched out like a sacrifice to the unrelenting sun, her torn dress clinging to her sweat-soaked body, her lips cracked and bleeding, her hair plastered to her face. Each breath was a shallow struggle, each movement a battle against the ropes and the scorching heat. A silent crowd of villagers stood at a distance, their eyes fixed on her. Some averted their gazes, shame flickering in their faces, while others stared with cold satisfaction, as if her suffering validated their own fears. At the forefront stood Silas Boone, the village head, a man with hawk-sharp eyes and a voice that carried the weight of unchallenged authority. His hand rested on the worn handle of his whip, though he had no need to wield it, the ropes and the sun were punishment enough. Boone's voice sliced through the heavy silence. "This is the way of our fathers," he declared, pointing at the bound girl. "If she survives 3 days under the gaze of the heavens, she walks free. If she dies, her guilt is proven. That is our law." No one dared to challenge him. The villagers nodded slowly, some muttering prayers under their breath, others spitting into the dirt as if to seal the ritual. The girl, Abigail Dawson, was only 23. She had been accused of stealing gold from the village stores, a crime pinned on her by Boone's unwavering decree. She had denied it with every fiber of her being, but her pleas fell on deaf ears against his ironclad authority. Now she lay helpless, her skin blistering under the pitiless sun, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Please, I beg you. I did nothing." The desert wind swallowed her words, and the villagers only stared. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, old men crossed their arms, and not one stepped forward. To them, this was not cruelty, it was justice, a tradition etched into generations, a law of fire and sand. To question it was to defy the village itself. One by one, they turned their backs and walked away, leaving Abigail to face the judgment of the sky alone. The sun climbed higher, scorching the ground beneath her until her skin burned against the earth. Her eyes fluttered, too heavy to stay open, and the world narrowed to the pounding of her heart and the relentless buzz of flies over the cracked soil. Blood lingered on her lips, her voice reduced to a faint whisper lost in the vastness of the desert. Yet, in her despair, one thought clung to her mind: she did not want to die unseen, her truth unheard. Her lips trembled as she prayed for someone, anyone, to pass through this cursed land and hear her cry. Hours bled into one another, and the sun began to sink, though its heat still seared her skin. Abigail's whispers faded to silence. She thought no one would come. Then, faintly, she heard it, the crunch of hooves on dry earth, slow and steady. Through the haze of heat, her eyes cracked open, and she saw him, a tall figure on horseback, shoulders squared, moving with the deliberate caution of a man who had walked battlefields and carried their scars. Elias Carter, 56, was a rancher now, but once a soldier who bore both wounds and secrets from the war. He had chosen solitude over company, the quiet of his ranch over the clamor of towns. But that silence shattered when he saw her, a girl bound to stakes, her skin raw, her lips torn from thirst. She lifted her head just enough to rasp, "Please, untie me." Her words struck him like a bullet. He could have ridden on, it would have been safer. Everyone knew better than to cross Silas Boone and his brutal law. But Elias was not a man to turn from suffering, not after the war, not after losing his family to men who looked away. He dismounted, the dry ground crunching under his boots, and knelt beside her. His shadow fell across her burned skin, and her eyes met his, wide with terror and a flicker of hope. "You're not guilty, are you?" he muttered. "No," she rasped. "I swear on my life." Elias drew a knife from his belt and cut the ropes at her wrists, the cords snapping free to reveal angry red marks. Her hands trembled as if freedom felt unreal. He cut the ropes at her ankles and lifted her with a strength that belied his years. She weighed almost nothing, the desert having stolen so much from her. He carried her to his horse, unaware of two villagers watching from a distant ridge, their eyes wide with shock. They would run to Boone soon enough. Elias had not just broken a law, he had defied tradition itself. As he set Abigail on the saddle, she whispered, "They'll kill you for this." "Let them try," Elias said, his jaw tight. With a tug on the reins, the horse moved forward, carrying them away from that cursed patch of earth. But danger loomed just beyond the ridge. "Stop right there, Carter." The shout cut through the dry wind. Elias pulled the reins and turned to see Silas Boone, flanked by 4 men. Boone's long coat flapped in the breeze, his hand hovering near his revolver. One man gripped a heavy wooden stick, another held a knife that gleamed in the sun, and a third clutched a half-drawn pistol. "You think you can ride off with her?" Boone sneered. "You've spit on our law, the law of our fathers." Elias's voice was low, steady. "That law's no justice, Silas. It's cruelty. You know she's no thief. You just needed someone to blame." Boone's lips curled into a humorless grin, and his men fanned out to block the trail. Abigail gripped the saddle horn, whispering, "They'll kill you." Elias's hand brushed his old Colt, still holstered, as the silence stretched taut. The first man charged, swinging his stick. Elias sidestepped, driving a fist into the man's stomach. The stick clattered to the ground as the man doubled over. The second came with his knife, but Elias caught his wrist, twisted hard, and sent the blade flying. An elbow to the jaw dropped him. The third raised his pistol, but Elias kicked his arm, sending a wild shot into the sky before slamming him into the dust. The fourth man froze, glancing at Boone, who stood motionless, his hand still near his revolver but not drawing. He knew Elias was no bluffer, a man forged in war. Boone spat into the dirt. "This isn't finished, Carter. You and the girl will pay." He turned, signaling his men to follow. The beaten men limped away, their pride as broken as their bodies. Elias climbed onto the horse beside Abigail, who looked at him with a mix of awe and fear. They rode in silence, both knowing Boone's humiliation would not go unanswered. Where could they run? Who would stand with them? The town was quiet when Elias guided the horse into the sheriff's yard. Abigail swayed, half-conscious, and Elias caught her before she fell. Sheriff Thomas Hale stepped out, his hand on his belt. "Elias Carter," he said. "Haven't seen you since the war, and now you bring a girl half dead. What happened?" "Boone," Elias said, carrying Abigail inside and setting her on a bench. The sheriff's face hardened as Elias recounted the story. "Boone's been strutting like a king too long," Hale muttered, checking Abigail's rope burns. "She needs water, food, rest." "I believe her, but belief's not enough. We need proof." Elias nodded. He trusted Hale, they had fought together, and that bond held. Abigail stayed in a room near the sheriff's office, and Elias visited often, bringing bread or coffee. Slowly, she spoke more, sharing stories of her lost farm and parents, of Boone's false accusations. Elias shared quiet tales of the war, of nights too long and mornings too bitter. Their silences carried as much weight as their words. One evening, Abigail asked, "Why didn't you leave me there?" Elias paused. "No one should die like that. And I've lost enough already." Her hand brushed his, and something stirred in the rancher who had long shut out the world. But danger brewed. Boone's men whispered threats in taverns and alleys. Sheriff Hale's men uncovered missing gold shipments and discrepancies in Boone's accounts. The evidence was mounting, but so was the storm. Hale rode into the village with Elias and Abigail, presenting the evidence to the gathered townsfolk. Boone shouted, calling it lies, but the proof was undeniable. The villagers' fear turned to rage. They dragged Boone to the same stakes where Abigail had suffered, binding him under the merciless sun. Abigail whispered, "It's cruel. Elias nodded. Sometimes a cruel law swallows its maker. Maybe that's justice. Sheriff Hale looked at them. You're free now. But freedom here comes at a price. They rode out together, the horizon ablaze with fire and gold. Abigail's voice was soft but steady. Thank you, Elias. You gave me hope. For the first time in years, Elias smiled. Hope, long lost, was alive again. What do we take from this? Justice, though slow, finds its way. One person's courage can break chains. And love can bloom in the harshest deserts. Would you have cut the ropes? Should cruel traditions decide fate? Share your thoughts.